First, we're going to talk about the origin of Buddhism. Buddhism, founded in the late 6th century BCE by Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha, is an important religion in most of the countries of Asia. Siddhartha Gautama was the warrior son of a king and queen. His father provided him with many luxuries and pleasures, but he once went on a series of 4 chariot rides where he first saw severe forms of human suffering. Those sufferings included old age, illness, and death. The contrast between his life and this human suffering made him realize that all of the pleasures on earth were in fact transitory and could only mask human suffering. He was determined to end suffering, so he eventually found a way to provide true answers to this cause of suffering and permanent release from the sufferings. Next, we have major events that shaped Buddhism. First, we have the creation of the Sangha community in 5th century BCE, where Buddha organized a group of monks and nuns to create a framework for the practice and spread of the Buddhist religion. Next, we have the spread through the Silk Road, the spread of the faith along the Silk Road, which reached parts of Asia and other parts of the world. Next, Buddha's first sermon at Deer Park, where he delivered his first sermon as Buddha, in which he discussed the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. Next, we have the growing development of Buddhist schools, which consisted of a multitude of schools based around the teachings of Buddhism, which began to grow, spread, and evolve. Next, we'll be talking about the structure and leadership roles of Buddhism. The Buddha never considered himself as the leader. He preferred to be known as a member of the Sangha society. He never claimed himself as a savior. Rather, he presented himself only as a guide or teacher. Attempts to combine Buddhist education and practice with leadership are rarely found. The Maitri, known as friendship, Karuna, known as compassion, Mudita, known as sympathetic joy, and a thought for welfare for society found in Buddhist philosophy is the foundation of an effective and efficient leadership. Buddhist education believes that friendship and compassion are the basis of all relationships and behavior. And efficient leadership is drawn from the tireless practice of compassion.
Alrighty, so now we get into the splinter groups of Buddhism. So there are 3 major branches of Buddhism in the modern world, and the first is Mahayana Buddhism. This school of Buddhism is more liberal toward monastic tradition, and the emphasis is less on nirvana and more on knowledge or wisdom. Next, we get into Theravada Buddhism, which is more conservative, and they strive to become arhats, or basically people who reach enlightenment and gain freedom from the cycle of samsara, which is the continuous cycle of life, death, and rebirth. This Buddhism is referred to as the path of the elders. Lastly, we get into Vajrayana Buddhism, which is also described as Tibetan, and they believe that their school of Buddhism is the fastest way to enlightenment, and that one can reach enlightenment in a single lifetime through spiritual tools such as visualization and mantra.
So Buddha taught so many kind of teachings levels because of he, for example, immediately after he reached enlightenment, and he met a group of people. These people only ready to understand certain level of Four Noble Truths, which are suffering, cause of suffering, free from suffering, cause of free from suffering. These are the Four Noble Truths. So he just explained what are these. And then later, this person or another person who was a little bit or more advanced. So then he explained, you need to understand suffering as suffering, cause of suffering as also cause, and so on and so forth. He explained more detail. And then he explained later even more subtle way to explain. So therefore, there are 3 times, 3 occasions to explain different way. And then there are also many other occasions that are slightly different or totally different that we taught beforehand. Because another occasion not so important, but different listeners, different audience. So therefore it comes out different. Theravada tradition is basic Buddhist teaching, basic Buddhist doctrine or teaching, which we, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, we need to study all these Theravada theories or Theravada practice, this as a fundament. Without having Theravada or Hinayana, the practice, so there's no way to understanding of Mahayana and Tantrayana. So this at the end, question of procedure. As a fundament, we need to understand certain level, and then on top of that, we can add if you are ready to know.
To become a practitioner of Buddhism, you need to first pick a school of Buddhism that interests you the most. This is because there are different ceremonies involved in each school of Buddhism, and you need to figure out whether you want to be a layperson or live a monastic life. Next, you should attend services or meditations to better confirm if this is really what you want to do. And after that confirmation, you should find a qualified teacher who is knowledgeable and compassionate. You then need to take refuge in the Triple Gem, and this is a ceremony basically relying on the Triple Gem, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Next, you need to practice the 5 precepts, which are ethical guidelines, refraining from the following: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. Lastly, you need to meditate regularly. We know that this is a central practice in Buddhism, and regular meditation helps to develop concentration, insight, and it leads to greater peace, happiness, and wisdom.
Taking refuge in the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, is the first step on the path of learning Buddhism. It means to regard the Buddha as the model, use Buddha Dharma to transform our false concepts, and see.
Next, we get into Buddhism and the Radical Reformation. Now, these are 2 distinctly different religious movements, but they do share some qualities. Like, for example, they both reject established religious hierarchies. In the book, we see that the Anabaptists rejected the authority of the Catholic Church, and Buddhist traditions emphasize the rejection of the reliance on external authorities. Also in chapter 14, we see that there were 4 principles of the Radical Reformation, and one being pessimism, which is the belief that the world cannot be trusted. In Buddhism, it's highly encouraged to let go of earthly thoughts and emotions and materials to achieve enlightenment. Lastly, we get into ethical emphasis. So both traditions place a strong emphasis on ethical behaviors and living a virtuous life. So now we get into some famous people who are practitioners. So from left to right, we have Michelle Yeoh at the bottom, who is an actress. At the top, we have Tiger Woods, who is a professional golfer. In the middle, we have Steve Jobs, who is a former CEO of Apple. To the right of him, we have Bell Hooks, who is a writer. And lastly, we have Tina Turner, who was a singer and actress.
Hi, my name is Janae, and I'm going to be talking about some of the most famous Buddhist celebrations, the major beliefs of Buddhism, the rituals of Buddhism, and the connection between humanism and Buddhism. The first celebration that I like to talk about is called Magha Puja Day. It's also referred to as the Fourfold Assembly because there were 1,250 Sangha followers that spontaneously came to see Buddha. All of his followers were enlightened monks. They were direct disciples, having been ordained by Buddha himself, and it was the full moon day of March. The next celebration that I'd like to talk about is called the Buddhist New Year, and each culture observes the Buddhist New Year in a unique way. 3 of the most common observances of the Buddhist New Year is the Tibetan New Year, which is a multi-day event in January, February, or March. The Japanese New Year, which is a 3-day celebration that begins on January 1st. and the Thai New Year, which is usually celebrated in April. Many cultures go to temples to light a candle, they clean their homes, and they pay respects to their ancestors. The next celebration I'd like to talk about is called Wesak, and on this day, Buddha's life and death are commemorated. People try to focus on reaching their own enlightenment. Most people clean their homes, they worship at the temple, and offer gifts to Buddha. The next celebration I'd like to talk to you about is called Dharma Day. It marks the beginning of Buddha's teachings and of his enlightenment to others. On this day, most people just read Buddhist texts. The next celebration that I'd like to talk to you about is called Nirvana Day. Buddha's death is celebrated because most believe that he was able to reach enlightenment. People go to monasteries or temples and offer gifts. They meditate on what the afterlife is like for their ancestors and what it'll look like for them. The last celebration that I'd like to talk to you about is called Kathina, and it's typically celebrated in October and November, and at this time monks have been in seclusion for 3 months, and Kathina allows them to come out into the open, and they're offered a cloth by citizens. The celebrations and offerings during this time can last up to a full month, and during this time also some people might be giving money to the less fortunate.
Now, countries in Asia are marking one of the most important Buddhist festivals of the year. It's Vesak Day, also known as Buddha Day. Now, it usually takes place on the first full moon in May, but previously events have been disrupted by the pandemic. The BBC's Azadeh Mashiri reports.
This celebration isn't meant to be done remotely. And yet for these monks, it's the first time they can mark Vesak Day, also known as Buddha Day, together since the pandemic began.
Today, it is an important day as it commemorates the birth, enlightenment and the great decease of the Lord Buddha.
Celebrated on the first full moon in May, no effort was spared. Worshippers in Thailand laid out thousands of LED lanterns at this temple to mark the occasion. 21,000 to be exact. Some monks were still encouraged to join through Zoom, the spectre of COVID-19 still hovering over the celebrations. But for those who could join, it was a welcome return.
I think it's amazing that we can celebrate again in person and of course with the right safety precautions, but that we can be back here. As I understand, last 2 years wasn't possible, so I think it's a great thing, actually.
Celebrations also took place in other parts of Asia, in places like Bangladesh, and even Sri Lanka, which lifted a curfew for the event amidst deep political turmoil. Fitting for a day encouraging reflection and new beginnings. Azadeh Mashiri, BBC News.
Now I'm going to be talking about some of the major beliefs of Buddhism. Buddhists don't believe in God or any other deity, but they do believe that there are some supernatural people who can help them along their journey to reach enlightenment. Most Buddhists believe that people can have billions of rebirths. To them, human life is just a cycle of rebirths, and one can be completely freed from this once they achieve enlightenment or nirvana. They believe that we may not be in the same body, but that our spirits will live on after death. Buddha taught that your actions in this life will determine your status in the next. Buddha believed that men and women should be seen as equals, and that women could achieve enlightenment just like men, and this was pretty radical for that time. He also believed that women could be in leadership positions. Even though Buddhism has taken on different forms, all Buddhists follow the 5 precepts. They are: refrain from taking life, refrain from taking what is not given, refrain from the misuse of the senses, refrain from wrong speech, and refrain from the intoxicants that cloud the mind. Buddha's most famous teachings are the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, and the Eightfold Path. Now I'm going to be talking about some of the rituals of Buddhism, and those are bring forth offerings, by worshiping Buddha to better understand his texts and his messages, through meditation, which brings Buddhists to a peaceful state of mind. The next is through chanting, which clears the mind so that one can meditate, and typically this is done by reading a Buddhist text in Sanskrit. The next is through pilgrimage, which is just a journey to a temple or a holy space. And this is most commonly done to increase one's merit and to rid oneself of bad karma. The next is protective rites. And this is where mantras are recited aloud to invoke protection over a new home or to offer comfort to the ill. The last is through life cycle rites. And this is where people go to the temple and they pay homage to their deceased family members by praying to increase their merit for the next life.
I think in every culture, not only Buddhist, I think rituals are plays a very important role. Of course, to a certain extent, rituals are important, but what is most important is the mindset.
Now I'm going to be talking about the connection between humanism and Buddhism. Renaissance humanism was not equated with secularism or even atheism. Humanism at this time embraced the relationship with God and placed a new emphasis on the individual. These days, humanism is similar to Buddhism in that it denies the existence of God.
Here we will be talking about the customs of Buddhism. Buddhist practices are done to show signs of veneration and devotion. Certain garments are worn to complement one's complexion as well as protect from heat and shame. You will often see them in colors. Buddhist teachings were originally orally passed around until they were able to be recorded on Sanskrit and translated into various dialects. There are various locations where Buddhism is taught. Where you can join here locally is Mid-City Zen, which is on 623 North Rendon, New Orleans.
Buddhism first entered America in the middle of the 19th century during Gold.
Buddhism first came to America. So I virtually visited three different Buddhist